Good evening and welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. We have a very special program for you tonight. The B20, ahead of the big G20 meeting in Delhi. The B20 looks at the business process and it involves business leaders, some of the biggest in the world, all over here in New Delhi. On this program, a very special conversation with the president of Microsoft. We talk about the future of artificial intelligence. Also top industry leaders from India, where we look at digitalization and India's journey all the way to resilient supply chains across the world. All that and a lot more coming up on this special program. Well, the B20 process well and truly underway. It is such an important part of the overall G20 process. India is the president. But in terms of bringing in the inclusion of people around the world, ensuring that there is greater prosperity and looking at digitalization as well, that's all a key part of what B20 is all about. We've got a wonderful guest with us, the president of Microsoft. Thanks very much, Mr. Smith, for being with us.
Thank you.
India has a wonderful digital sort of process. You know, we've got digitalization happening at so many levels. Is that a model you think that works elsewhere as well?
I think it is. I think there is no country that I have seen anywhere in the world that has advanced so far, so quickly, especially since this decade began. And I think from our perspective at Microsoft, what we see is not only what, say, the digital public infrastructure is doing for India, what it can do for the world, it can do even more now that we're bringing more AI to it.
And if we're talking about AI, and I must, I mean, there is hardly anybody who knows more about AI. The big concern is that at one level it suppresses growth, for example, of children who now rely on AI increasingly. How would you respond to those concerns?
Well, I think AI is a tool. It's a tool that can help people think smarter. They can find answers more quickly. They shouldn't stop thinking. It'll make them more productive. It'll make them more successful. Mm-hmm. It'll help people translate from one language to another. I think it can be actually a source for even more growth, the creation of new jobs.
What is the future of ChatGPT?
I think the future of ChatGPT, the future of what we think of as generative AI, is in some ways just getting started. It's making doctors more effective at diagnosing diseases. It's helping us find new drugs to cure disease. It will be tutors for our students. It'll be tutors to help parents work with their kids. But I think more than anything, it's just a tool that can help everybody find answers to their questions, to start writing faster, to write better, to create. It will, I think, be as important to the future of knowledge as, say, the printing press was literally 500 years ago.
When does AI start getting dangerous?
Well, I think our goal is to ensure that it does not become dangerous. We have to ensure that AI always remains under human control. And the best time to start is now, to put in place safeguards, to put in place safety breaks for companies that are creating it to do it responsibly. It's the right time for us to start focusing on new laws and regulations as well.
And that has to be an international effort.
I think it has to be an international effort, and it will be an effort in each country. I think India will play a critical role, but I think the world needs to come together.
How would you respond to those who've actually looked at AI technology very, very closely and said that, no, there is sentience already in place based on some of the responses they're getting? People, for example, some who've been retrenched in other companies, etc., etc. Are their concerns not real?
I think that AI is not magic. It's not an independent source of knowledge or reasoning. It's not sentient. It's math. And I think that there may be a distant future when it's different, but that too is a reason for us to focus now on how we ensure that this technology serves humanity, that it remains under human control. We have time to address this, but there's no time like the present to get started and move quickly.
And a final question to you. Your company's abiding interest in India. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Whether it's growing in India, Indian engineers, software engineers, other areas. What does Microsoft have to offer people like me?
Well, I first hope that we have the opportunity to offer people like you. I hope we have the opportunity to offer everyone in India the kinds of tools that will make people more productive, that will help grow their businesses, that will help advance security and privacy, that will help us advance the climate needs of the planet. And India means a huge amount to Microsoft. It is a source of engineering talent. We have great innovations taking place here, basic research, every part of our company. So many of our products are built in part in India. So I think India, more than ever, is critical not just to Microsoft, but frankly to the technology sector the world over.
Wonderful speaking to you, and I hope this B20 session works out well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, Mr. Brad Smith, telling us a little bit, actually quite a lot about artificial intelligence, where it's going, the checks and balances that need to exist, and of course the future of Microsoft in India as well. Well, as we track the B20 process and indeed G20 and what it's all about, we thought we'd speak to some of India's finest voices in the industry space. We've got a wonderful panel with us. Mr. Baba Kalyani, thanks so very much for being with us. Malika Srinivasan, Mr. T.V. Narendran and Mr. R. Dinesh. So let me come to you first. One of the big agendas of B20 this time around is in ensuring resilient supply chains. Now that's important because when it comes to energy security or food security, the war continues to have an impact. How is B20 looking into this?
So I think there has been a specific task force which actually is headed by Malika, so she can cover the details of it. But overall, if you really look at it, I think the primary focus has been on ensuring that there is a better method of making it inclusive, making it digitally well connected and available across the board. And obviously it needs to take into account the needs of the global south and make sure that cuts across from availability and not just food but also various other requirements across the supply chain.
Sure. And ma'am, would you like to add to that in terms of resilient chains?
Yes, I
whether
think
it's food or energy, so many areas.
Yes, it is the topic that's occupying everyone's mind right now, and it goes beyond it. During the B20 deliberations, I think what came out is that it goes way beyond just alternate sourcing, distributed sourcing, and stress testing of value chains. It goes beyond that. It has, of course, as you just mentioned, inextricably linked sustainability issue, but I think it is also exploring how do we build this resilience. And we've been able to take it forward a few steps because of the focus on resilience. A number of new themes, application of technology in trade could enable build resilience, working with LDCs and MSMEs could help build resilience. And I think there is FDI in sustainable ventures could build resilience. So there are a number of initiatives that have specifically been suggested, but I think the important concept is that resilience should not be looked at in isolation as only dual sourcing.
Right.
It needs to be looked at as a set of interconnected themes that include climate change, energy security, distributed sourcing, trade and technology, and inclusivity.
Sure. And we'll talk about those in particular. But the digitalization stories, and perhaps you can talk a little bit about that. It's something we take great pride about in India. And you know, we are involved not just at the level of the government, but individual companies as well. It's part of our ethos. It's all about inclusion at one primary level. Do you believe that's a model from India that can go to the rest of the world, or the B20 in this case?
Absolutely. I think one area where India is pretty much a benchmark is on the governance side, and the benefits that the common citizen is getting out of digitization. I think Indian companies, manufacturing particularly, have a great opportunity to invest hugely in smart manufacturing because we have the domain knowledge, we have the talent locally, and how do you translate that into value for the manufacturing sector? I think a lot of companies, including many of us sitting here, have already done that. It's a great opportunity because you can drive a tremendous amount of efficiencies and stakeholder experiences through a good transformation.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Kalyani, a broader question about India and our demographic dividend. We are now the most populous nation in the world. We've got a very young population. That means for the next 30 years, if we get things right, we have a real opportunity at going to the next level, moving into the next strata among countries. Do you believe that this is perhaps the greatest asset that we in India have?
Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. If you look at India's economic growth plan from today to 2047, India at 100. And if I just look at the manufacturing sector and just 5 or 6 sectors in that manufacturing sector, the highest growth that India will see will come from automotive.
Yes.
4 million four-wheelers will go from 4 million to something like 30 million.
Yes.
Okay, you're talking about a 7x growth. It'll be Higher than that will be the automotive components, because that 7x growth of the automotive sector plus the opportunity for exports using this whole demographics, the younger population, well-trained, digitally savvy. See, what is it that people are looking for when you talk about resilient supply chain? I mean, one part of the resilient supply chain is what Mallika talked about or what Narendran talked about. The other part of the supply chain is that people at the other end of the supply chain, the guys who are buying things from you, do not want to spend their time tracking things and wanting to know what is going on and not going on and all that. Now, all this India can solve using digital technology, using younger people. This is our biggest advantage. Even the Americans can't do it, believe me. They are just going to go down in terms of their manufacturing capabilities. So are the Germans. I don't know much about the Chinese. Japanese, Japanese anyway are getting old. So who does it leave? I mean, it's India, it's Vietnam, maybe Indonesia.
Right.
And the largest part of the cake for the next 25 years is going to come to India.
Mr. Dinesh, reskilling and upskilling, that's linked to making use of our digital, of our demographic dividend. If we don't get that right, then this is all talk, right?
I think we are getting it right, but it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight, as we all know. So I mean, we all know about people getting the industry educational institutions tie up to make people ready to be employed, etc. But having said that, I think in the new digital age, the speed of change is going to be so fast that it's a continuous process. And actually, every private sector, or I would call it every well-run company, is continuously doing this and continuously looking at this. Is there an opportunity to further speed it up? Yes, 100%. Is there an opportunity to further reach out to some of the states or some of the regions where we believe the level of skilling is not available and make them more employable? Yes, equally so. But I think let us also not forget, I think there is, the women population of the world which we have an opportunity to make more employable. There is also the younger people who are coming into, I would call it jobs, to be ready to be upskill themselves. So I don't think it's a challenge in doing it. Is there an awareness to do it? Yes. Is it happening? Yes, it is happening, but it is more, I would call it, with specific initiatives. And I think the focus will have to be to scale this up and make it into even more important focus. It's not that there is no focus right now.
Ma'am, Mr. Dinesh was talking about the role of women in our economy. I think our demographic dividend is best realized if we've got more women entering the formal workspace. And that has been an area where statistically we've been quite poor. How important is our future going to be dictated from an economic standpoint by greater inclusion of women in our economy, in the formal economy?
Surely, because if you don't use and get 50% of your population engaged to the level that they should be engaged, you're definitely going to be, your performance as a nation is going to be subpar. We really don't match up in terms of women participation in the workforce compared to most economies in the world, and that's been an area of disappointment. So when picking up from where Dinesh left that question, it's really about getting our skilling aligned. You asked the question on skilling. Today, our women coming out of the colleges, the question to ask ourselves is, are they employable? What needs to be built into our curriculum to make that change? There are lots of gaps in terms of skilling. The economy is growing very fast, new sectors are coming up. Beyond digital skilling, we have even skill gaps in the area of healthcare workers, for example, nurses, big short supply. So it's a whole issue is about how can we skill our women appropriately?
Yeah.
How can we provide them social support systems that will enable them to take care of children, especially when at the first few years, and that's one of the biggest impediments in the way of their joining the workforce. So what can we do for all as a government initiative? What can corporates do? And really what can educational institutions do? And I think we need to bring all of these together in order to have a holistic approach to women participation.
So, climate change, it's no longer something that's distant, it's upon us. We see it every day. We see it possibly in the floods. in Himachal Pradesh, parts of Uttarakhand, etc., etc. How is B20 as a group addressing the challenge of sustainability and climate change?
So I think it's a very important subject, and the good thing is it's a thematic subject. It will continue it has continued from the Indonesian presidency and will continue beyond us. So there are multiple issues to address. Firstly, the fact that this transition is going to be complex and costly. How do you fund that transition? The priorities of the global south are different from the global north. How does the financing flow? How does technology move across borders more seamlessly than it does today? So I think a lot of the recommendations that we talked about is about that.
Sure.
It's also about making sure that the transition is just, is inclusive. We include the MSMEs as well in this transition. So a lot of the recommendations which have come from the task forces are addressing that. The the institute, B20 Institute, which was proposed this morning, is also to help address some of these issues from a continuity point of view. There are sector-specific roadmaps which are being developed. During Indonesia's presidency, something was developed for the power sector. So similarly, we are looking at how can we develop sector-specific roadmaps. So a lot of the focus of this presidency has been on climate change, and I think it will continue to remain the focus for subsequent presidencies as well.
How will B20 economies or our own economy only succeed if there is substantial spend on R&D, innovation and tech? That's also something we're looking at here, in your opinion.
I think that is the ideal world, that you need to spend a lot of money on R&D and innovation and technology. But we don't live in an ideal world, especially in India with such a large population and so many small and medium businesses that almost contribute 60-70% to our economy in terms of GDP. You have to create a democratic platform where these people, or any Indian or anybody from the south, let's say, can get technology, can get innovation, can get ideas without having to spend money on it. I'm not saying you don't need to invest in R&D and innovation, don't get me wrong. But we got to figure out a way to share it. Pretty much like the UPI. UPI was created, and today we are sharing UPI with the UAE and with France, and maybe tomorrow it will be UK or Germany, God knows where. And in India, hundreds and thousands of businesses have been created using the UPI platform without those businesses having to spend any money to develop and or create R&D.
Right.
So I think the strategy has to be for us, and it's the private sector and the government put together, people who can think about this, to create platforms which will help digitalize the small and medium sector, which will help them use digital and AI technologies in their business without having to, spend millions of dollars in trying to develop something.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
That's the way to go. Otherwise, a country as large as ours, we don't have the resources for all this. We may think about billions or trillions of dollars required. We may do the math. I don't know where it's coming from.
And ma'am, a last question to you. The services sector and expansion, not just for India, but also perhaps for other B20 nations. How is that something that is of concern this time around?
So it's a very interesting area because services sector is growing much faster. Services sector is growing faster than overall global trade. And within the services sector, digitally delivered services are growing the fastest. And I think that's raising a whole set of new issues with respect to easy flow of data, interoperability of standards, security, cyber security, and a whole bunch of new issues that I think it would be very, very useful for G20 countries to anticipate some of these problems. Even things as simple as sounds simple, and I say it perhaps more complicated, as a classification of services. We need to address that. So most of the issues are coming from either tariff disputes or interpretations, technical interpretations, etc. So let's begin there. And then there is a whole element of services within manufacturing. And today almost 30 to 40% of manufactured goods, the component is services. So how can we disaggregate those, and how can we deal with more interoperability, standard flows, data flow protocols, etc. So I think there's a whole set of new issues coming because there is an engine of growth for our trade as well as for global trade that we need to capitalize on.
All right. Well, thank you very much, for sharing your thought. There you have it, a quick look at B20 with some of India's finest business minds looking at the opportunities that the group of 20 nations actually has. This is, of course, the B20 process, but the ideas are common for many countries in the world, whether it is resilient supply chains, whether it is digitalization, whether it is a constant focus on the climate challenge. These ideas are important for billions around the world. We've got a wonderful guest with us, Borger Brender with us, the President of the World Economic Forum. Thanks, sir, very much for being with us. Great to see you in India, not Davos. A little bit warmer over here, I suspect. But let's talk a little bit about what the B20 agenda is. And one of the key issues is resilient global trade. And I think this is important because we've had problems with the Ukraine war. Food price volatility is a huge problem. Energy price volatility is another huge problem. How is B20 addressing that?
So you're right that even if a country like India is seeing historic high growth, there are challenges related to soaring food prices, but also the energy prices. And these are global challenges too that the G20 needs to look at. We have food insecurity now many places in the world. How is it possible to make sure that Ukraine, that is one of the largest producers of wheat, can continue their export? And then on the oil and gas side, we know that the gas prices have been very high. This is due to LNG. Europe now importing a lot of LNG to replace the Russian import. But this means that many developing countries and also emerging economies that were buying LNG before cannot afford it anymore because Europe is paying such a high price. But at the same time, we're seeing that the second largest economy in the world, China, is growing much slower, and they're the biggest importer of oil and gas in the world. So that can also lead to, and the deflation that China is now seeing, can also lead to less demand for this product. So let's see.
Digitalization is an area where India has invested in greatly. And I think, just as an observer, the digital back end has really come together now. There were a lot of skeptics. We were skeptics that what will this actually achieve? Can you link digitalization to growth? But it does appear to be working in several areas. Do you believe it's a model that can be replicated?
I hope so. The fact that 1.4 billion people have their own digital identity, that almost 1.4 billion people are on their cells and at affordable prices. If you have a cell phone, you have an ID number, and you also have a telephone number, you can also then establish your own bank account. You can wire money. This is a prerequisite for growth, inclusion, and poverty eradication. It's such a staggering number for India because if you look globally, close to 4 billion out of 7 billion are not connected digitally in adequate way, and the prices are too high and not affordable. So look at, for India, this is a huge benefit, a huge driver of growth. So I think the fact that India now has a growth between 6, 7, 8%, it's the fastest growing economy in the world of the big ones, and it has been 3 consecutive years now. And also what is another staggering number is that if you look at what India contributes of global growth, 18% of all global growth now comes from India. This is incredible. So I think one of the driving factors behind this increased productivity is the digital strength of this country, and other countries should learn from India.
Climate change is a concern. We've been speaking about it in Davos now for the last several years. But it's not just for governments to adopt climate change policies. Of course, that's important. It's also for companies. It's also for people across the world. We're talking about B20, but how is the World Economic Forum really focused on climate change as a core agenda for you?
So many of the leading companies in the world are partners of the World Economic Forum. So we have formed different public-private partnerships and alliances. So we have, for example, an alliance that we started in 2014 where we have 120 Fortune 300 companies. These CEOs have committed to make sure that their company is net zero by 2050. And among these companies, there's also hard to abate sectors. We have aluminum companies, we have cement companies, we also have fertilizer companies. So that's one example. Then we have another initiative called the First Movers Coalition, where we have 88 companies, also several Indian companies. And what these companies have promised to do is to use their purchasing powers, because these are huge conglomerates, many of them. And they say, if we buy aluminum or if we buy steel in the future, more of it has to be green. And then they create a demand for green steel, green aluminum, green shipping, green fertilizers, green cement. This is very, very powerful. So these are some like practical initiatives that we have taken. And I think private sector sends a strong message. The paradox, though, is that there is too little happening in the decarbonization still globally. And the misunderstanding here is that people say, oh, it's too expensive. But the reality is that the cost of climate change now is much higher than those initiatives. So the cost of inaction far exceeds the cost of action. But still not happening. It should be common sense, but common sense is not common.
Wonderful speaking to you, sir. As
Thank
always,
you.
it's a great conversation. But it is fascinating what Mr. Brenda actually has to say about India demographic dividend. But the G20 is also a huge international opportunity for countries well beyond India to look at some of these key areas, upskilling, reskilling. There's healthcare, digitalization as well. It is a mammoth challenge which countries need to really come up around the world and address. Well, the B20 agenda is very broad. It looks at everything from digital resilience to sustainable chains, whether it's in food security or energy security. It looks at the entire issue of climate as well. But one of the areas that the B20 is focusing on, and perhaps something we need to discuss, is the entire issue of inclusion. Shobna Kamineni with us. Thanks very much, ma'am, for being with us. If you look at inclusion and India's demographic dividend, I think while we have the numbers, if we don't employ more women in the workforce, by which I mean the professional workforce, as it were, we will never be able to achieve our potential. Would you agree?
I mean, this is something that we all know, Vishnu, but nobody has done anything materially except make the noise. Just by having a Women's Day or having this particular separate vertical for this thing and say we're inclusive, diversity, what have we done to make the change? So here, couple of things that I'd like to put out, and then you can ask me, happy to go deeper. One is materially, what should we do? So by having women directors, making it compulsory, that has changed the space, that you've had a whole lot of new women entering into a very important corporate boardrooms, which was hitherto just a male-dominated bastion. If we can do materially, suppose you put out an idea that women get, earning, or from women's incomes, you get a 5% tax rebate. Just tell me, every family business in India that has kept women out as part of their charter, constitution, will suddenly say, oh my God, I'm going to get a better deal, I get 5% more that stays with me. The whole fabric will change. Yeah. India, from being below Saudi Arabia in the women's workforce participation, will just shoot up. Yeah. And I think in an election year, materially, it's just a win-win, not just for the economy, for the country, for women, and it's a great example. Sure. So I think that would be the one big idea I learnt here.
Yeah. Attached with that, the greater role of women, of course, is the importance of reskilling and upskilling, again to reach that potential of our demographic dividend. Jobs are changing, the nature of the workforce is changing. Yes, inclusion of women, but they need to be skilled. Everybody needs to be reskilled. Again, how is that a big challenge at B20?
So I'm a co-chair, right, yeah, of the skilling and mobility, yeah, and in that, it's the three pillars we had. One pillar completely devoted to what we can do to give ministerial recommendations for skilling, because what we've seen is nearly 51% of the global workforce today will have to be reskilled just to be able to cope with the challenges of tomorrow. And think about a lifespan of people working, people working longer, people migrating, people changing, different as jobs move on. So reskilling, upskilling, just skilling alone is going to take so much of the world's attention. And unless we do it, we're just going to have a productivity collapse. And I think this is something in countries that hardly have workers, they need this. In countries like ours that have a surplus of workers, we need to be able to engage them to be globally mobile and to be, to move around the country.
Tell us a little bit about the healthcare space. I mean, that's something that is obviously at the core of your existence almost. Are there lessons from India which can be shared with the world now? Certainly in the pharma sector, India is the pharmacy of the world. Statistically, that is correct. There have been concerns of late on the quality of some of our drugs. That being said, what can India do going forward to being a real partner for other nations?
The very simple answer is India for a greying world. You look at countries that are greying, whereas in India by 2030 we'll have the largest population inside the workforce. In the last 20 years, the participation from people staying at home to being dependent to actually being into the workforce because of our youthful age has really shifted to and by 2030 it will be 38%, which means we'll have the largest global workforce. And this global workforce, if they're skilled right, will be able to actually serve, because healthcare at the end of it is a touch job. And a lot of the touch can't go away. Tech is great, it helps us, makes us more productive. So if you can merge that productivity with the touch, I think that there can be millions of Indians, like what it was for the IT sector. This is going to be the next big wave for the world. And the second part, what India can do is, look at us, Chandrayaan showed cheaper half the cost of Interstellar, the movie. Same way, in terms, forever we've been that with healthcare. No matter what people crib and talk about Indian healthcare, just see the medicines today are 10% of what they are anywhere else in the world. Look at healthcare, you can have an open heart surgery at 20% of what? Same results, Apollo as Mayo, but you go to Mayo, you're going to spend 20 times more. This is the kind of arbitrage is not a good word, but this is the ability of what Indian medical value travel can actually create a multi-billion dollar. Not only is it soft diplomacy, it will serve the world, India to serve the world. That's the best way to say it.
Again, medicine, or even if it's not medicine, going forward, research and development and serious spends in R&D is a must. Do you believe that that is an area where across sectors India has been lagging? Certainly in the health sphere as well, we are great manufacturers, we are great replicators in a sense, but true research and development, and let's talk about your own space, the healthcare space, do you believe there is a lot of unrealized potential in India?
It takes money. So first of all, whatever we say that we spend too little in R&D and all that, by the time we sit and do payroll, pay your cost, change your equipment.
But that's true anywhere in the world.
No, they really have the foreign, they have access to much larger pools of capital. So what I think is, if we can partner, like what's happened now is all the global research, so we can't say that we don't do research. All the best research have Indian arms. If you look at it, whether it's motor, whether it's aerospace, whether it's healthcare, it's all here. That everyone has realized that they need to set up an innovation space either in Bangalore or Gurgaon or Pune or Hyderabad or any of these places. So you're seeing a different form of research which we're not counting. Yeah. So this is all that I'd like to say, that it's not like it's not happening here. I mean, you don't get great ISRO engineers just out of the blue. They are there.
We do it in our own way, right? With
yeah.
Frugal.
Frugal, jugaad, do partnerships.
But there's a limit
and
to
do
that.
This. But the thing is that the world still needs a space for that, to be able to do it well. And I think India, what we need to do is, once we get the scale, and I feel that otherwise we need to disrupt. So if you look in technology, we are second to none. If you really look at it in the tech space, who's done UPI? That is huge innovation that actually served millions of people. So I won't say that we're nowhere in that space. We just have to count the right things.
Wonderful speaking to you as
Thank
always. Shobna Kamineni there telling us a little bit about her primary issues, from inclusion to the healthcare space to R&D and so much more. It's back to the studio.
We're coming to you from the B20 Summit in the national capital that is discussing global economic challenges with global business leaders right here in the national capital. And I'm being joined by Mr. Dinesh Khara, the chairperson of the State Bank of India. Thanks very much, Mr. Khara, for joining us. So in the air, we can feel that there's so many conversations going on here at the B20 Summit. But what do you think need to be the key objectives, the key priorities, given India's presidency of the G20 this time?
I think India has shown a way to the whole of the globe. Here is a country which can move quite fast with such a large population. We have already seen that it took almost 54 years for us to break the first trillion barrier of the GDP, and thereafter it took almost 6 to 7 years for moving another trillion. And today we stand at 3.7 trillion, and we are the 5th largest economy in the globe.
Right.
So I think this is a very remarkable story which we are very proud of. Now going forward, we are looking at it now, almost about 850 billion worth of GDP is getting added every year.
Right.
So that is actually giving us the confidence that we are going to be a 5 trillion economy by the year 2027 for sure.
Right.
Now if you look around the levers which are there for the group, one of the very key theme here was relating to sustainability, relating to ESG, and I think that is one of the very important lever which is being unraveled by Indian economy. Today when it comes to renewable energy, I think seeing is believing. You go around the country, you will see the adoption of the renewable energy.
Right.
May it be the airports and may it be the farm sector. Everywhere you get to see the solar panels. And that is nothing but a reflection of how we will consume the fossil fuel, how we will limit our import of the fossil fuel, and that is how we will support the growth of the economy in this country. So I think straight from there, I'll come to the next item, which is the climate finance.
Right.
Perhaps these initiatives have not been seen in such a magnitude anywhere else what we get to see here in India. Now, if you look at the renewable energy, EVs, battery storage, EVs on the road, and the charging stations which have come up in such a short time at such a scale,
Right.
I think is something which we can showcase to the world at large.
Right. And so you mentioned the point about income, the aim to be a 5 trillion economy by the end of the decade, and then to be a developed economy by the time we celebrate 100 years of independence. That's the Prime Minister's vision. But one argument is that these are nominal incomes. Is it equitable growth? That's one of the focuses here at the B20 also, that you need to have growth while taking everybody together.
In fact, that is the reason financial inclusion is something which is very important.
Right. And even a recent SBI report came out which said that per capita incomes will grow 7 times by 2047. But if you take an inflation rate of about 5%, that just means that it will just double in the next 24 years. So do you think that's good enough, per capita income just doubling
No, I would say that,
real terms?
Beyond a point, once the inflection is reached, the incomes will grow faster and the inflation will be contained. It is not that it's not going to be a linear trend of the inflation going forward. So that's what is going to be seen. And moreover, if at all we will move towards the status of the developed economy, our inflation will be much controlled. So if you look at it, the fossil fuel import which you are trying to control is one of the very important reasons how we will be in a position to check the inflation going forward. So I think apart from that, the financial inclusion is a very, very important subject, because it's the inclusive growth which we are aiming for. And for that inclusive growth to really happen, unless and until the initiative which we took in terms of opening of the Jan Dhan account and then ensuring that all the DBT flows through them, which ensure that the leakages are minimized. And on the top of it, we did not confine ourselves only to the banking accounts. We also ensured that they should be having the benefit of insurance, life insurance, non-life insurance, accident insurance, and also they should be in a position to have the social security benefit to the APY. So I think these are the product, richness of the product, which has led to a situation where today almost about those zero balance accounts have got an average balance of not less than 3,500 rupees. Almost about 10 trillion worth of financial savings have been channelized into the mainstream.
On the banking sector, just this year we saw 3 major US banks collapsed, and after that there were fears in the global banking sector. People's trust really in the banking sector was a bit shaken. Do you think India is immune from such banking risks, and do you think the worst is over for the global banking fears?
I would say that India is immune as far as the contagion is concerned, and that is attributed to the very strong and the robust regulatory mechanism which is obtaining in the country, as compared to the developed West, where there were light regulatory regime for a set of banks. Here is a situation where we have brought in the NBFC, the cooperative sector, and everybody else also into the banking ambit, into the regulatory ambit of RBI. So we have strengthened our regulatory oversight. So that is one of the reasons why perhaps we are quite well insulated.
Thanks very much, Mr. Khara, for joining us for this conversation. Very insightful indeed. Thanks very much. I'm joined by a very special guest, Dr. Mukesh Aghi, the president of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Thanks very much, Dr. Aghi, for joining us this morning. You know, while just entering here, we could see so many thoughts buzzing, so many global leaders. The B20 platform is the platform for the global business leaders. It's the official G20 business leader discussion and dialogue forum. What do you think should be priorities for the B20 meeting this time?
Well, when you look at the theme of G20, one world, one mission, one people, I think that also dwells into on the business side. Today and the next 2 days, India will be the center of global business leadership. And it's important that we focus on economic growth of not only India but the rest of the world also. You have to understand over 1 billion people live below the poverty line.
Right.
And I think it's our moral responsibility as businesses to look at how while we drive quarterly profit, annual profit, how do we uplift the people living below the poverty line also. So it is important that we talk about the topic, leveraging technology also from that perspective.
Right, and in fact that's the theme of B20 also, RAISE, which means it's responsible, it's inclusive and it's sustainable businesses that they want to promote. That while of course we focused on development for the last few decades, now we want to focus on equitable development, and that's specifically important for a country like India. So with that mission of G20 and the mission of B20 given, what do you think India's role could be, how India could shape its global future with the G20 meeting and with the B20 meeting, with global leaders coming here in the national capital of India? How could that change India's global future?
So you have to understand the rise of India is a rise of rest of the world. India will grow 7%. It will basically accelerate growth in the rest of the world. If India continues to grow next 20 years, uplift its people, it is going to uplift the rest of the world also. So that's one. Number two is climate. It is important that we're seeing this summer, hurricanes and tornadoes and fires all across the world.
July was the hottest year on record.
On the record itself. So I think it's important we keep an eye on the climate while we focus on economic growth also. Then third factor is inclusiveness. It's not just bringing the people who are below the poverty line. Women empowerment is so critical because today in India the women in workforce is 15% and the last 10 years is coming down on an annual basis, which is not healthy. All studies have shown that if you include women in workforce, it will take India's GDP by almost $27 billion. So I think if you focus on just three broad themes, That's going to help not only India, but the rest of the world also.
Thanks very much, Dr. Agi, for joining us,
pleasure.
for speaking
Thank
to
you.
us this
Thanks a
morning.
lot.
Thanks very much. So that's the word we're getting from the B20 Summit here in the National Capital. That gives you a sense of the themes that this crucial G20 Business Forum will be discussing. In New Delhi, with camera person Rakesh Singh, Priyanshi Sharma for NDTV.
Joining us for a special interaction is Ms. Candice Johnson. She is the co-founder of SES and someone who looks at the global space industry very closely. Thank you for your time, Ms. Johnson. And to start with, I'd like to begin by asking you your take on India's moon mission being a huge success firstly.
Well, first of all, I have to congratulate India. I was so excited and I'm so thrilled to have been here, when you landed on the moon. This is a particularly important accomplishment, not only for you, but for the world and for space in general. And the reason why I say that is that you have landed, you're the first country to land on the south pole of the moon, and this is where we hope we will be able to find water. And when so the current thinking is that we are really going to use the moon as a jumping point to go to Mars. So the fact that you are the first to have done this is truly significant, and I think it paves the way for India to continue its leadership, and now as we enter this next phase of space, which is what we're calling space and space exploration. So
Right.
it's a phenomenal achievement. Also,
of course,
I have
a great
to say,
milestone at that, and of course a huge achievement for
Yes,
India,
absolutely.
and lots of lessons for the rest of the world to learn from India, in fact.
Well, indeed, I'm also chair of Sarah from Space, so we're the world's largest space tech venture fund. We're quoted on the London Stock Exchange. And so, of course, I have to look at it, also from an economic point of view and an investment point of view. And the fact that you've been able to do this with $73 million is really great.
It's remarkable.
It is, and it's good for me and my venture fund, because we can say, hey, look, if the Indians can do it for 73 million, just imagine what young entrepreneurs can do.
Of course, so India set a huge example there for the rest of the world, for sure. Now going forward, you're someone who also looks at the AI space very closely, and of course everyone's been talking about generative AI, how AI is going to change our hiring skill set altogether in the times to come. So how can you elaborate on that, and how will that really impact hiring globally?
So first of all, I have to say that I'm also the vice chair of the Institut Européen, so the European AI Institute. So indeed, what we try to do is we try to put the human face on AI for citizens throughout Europe and of course throughout the world. And I've been involved so many times in my life as the first. So, I did the world's first transporter satellite television. I did the world's first internet-based online service with Europe Online. One of my very dear friends, Vivian Reding, Vice Chair of the European Commission, she did the GDPR, which I think is very important to protect the people's data. So there are always good things and there are not so good things. And in my life, I've always focused, obviously, on the good things, but tried to put in place a framework to protect and secure the good things so that they could be used.
Right.
So I've coined a new phrase here at Delhi at the B20, where I'm also very proud to be co-chair of the Technology Innovation and R&D Task Force with Mr. Chris from Infosys, the co-founder of Infosys.
Right.
And basically, I'm telling everybody that AI is really equates to actionable insights. So AI, artificial intelligence, equates to actionable insight.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on, of course, the space and the AI industry going forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for asking me to come.
Well, that's it then on this very special program. Remember, NDTV's coverage of the G20 process continues. We've got a very special conclave tomorrow with 4 union ministers attending: Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Hardeep Puri, Piyush Goyal and Mr. R.K. Singh. That with the G20 Sherpa, many others. You don't want to miss this. Also, the release of a very exclusive report. From all of us here tonight, goodbye.